So what's the best bicycle pannier? Which one should you buy? In this video, I'm going to do a deep dive into how to choose the right bicycle pannier for you. Welcome back, Pathless Peddlers, and if you're new to the channel, if you love bike touring, gravel bikes, the supple life, then you have found your people. Hit that subscribe button. And before I jump right in, because I know that there are people already frothing in the comment section on how to pronounce the word pannier, I'm going to pronounce it pannier because that's how it's pronounced phonetically in the American English dictionary that I use. You can pronounce it pannier, pannier, whatever. But according to the references I've looked up on how to pronounce pannier, you can look it up on YouTube itself. It's pronounced pannier. So I'm sticking with that. So these are my 4 things to consider when choosing a bicycle pannier. So I think the first big decision right off the bat, which will kind of determine which route you're going to follow in terms of bike panniers, is whether you want or need one that is waterproof. Some people are really hardline, you know, they're not going to buy it, they're not going to touch it or look at it at all unless it's waterproof. For us, I think we've waffled on that opinion over the years. It used to be that I would only consider waterproof panniers, but over the last decade, I've found that highly water resistant panniers work pretty well. And regardless if a pannier is waterproof or not, if it's something I truly want to keep dry, I end up double bagging it anyways because I'm just paranoid like that. So clearly, I think the ultimate brand to consider when you're looking at waterproof panniers is Ortley. I mean, it just says it right by their logo. And yes, they are expensive, but they're German made. The quality is just top notch, and we've had our Ortley panniers for years. The first pair of Ortley panniers we bought, we actually used for about 6 or 7 years. And what failed first was the buckles, which we could have easily replaced, but at that point we wanted new bags anyway. So definitely worth the investment. But like I said, not absolutely make it or break it for us. This may be different for you. If you're gonna do a tour where you're fording many rivers, then clearly waterproofness is a main selling point. But over the years, we've also incorporated other bags like bags from our friends at Swift Industries, which while not waterproof are highly water resistant. I think one advantage of going the non-waterproof route is that it opens up your selection to lots of small makers all around the country, all around the world. And in general, they also tend to just have more organization, external pockets, just because it's easier to stitch things on and not be waterproof. So waterproof or not, really up to you, really up to your paranoia. I've personally kind of softened over the years on being a hardline waterproof person to just, to trying other bags, and if I have to keep something dry, I'm gonna double bag it. Another huge thing to consider, no pun intended, is your bag volume. How big is your gear? How much gear do you need to carry, and for how long? This will kind of determine your overall volume size of the bag. When we first started touring, we traveled with 4 bags, 2 large rear panniers, and 2 small front panniers. And that's because we literally sold everything and we're traveling for an indefinite amount of time and needed capacity to carry all the things that we might need for, life indefinitely. These days, however, we've migrated to a small front pannier. It fits the kind of trips that we're interested in doing these days, which tend to be weekend trips or week-long trips, and not so much the full expedition trips anymore. I also find them plenty big enough for bike commuting. They'll fit a laptop, a tablet, kind of your daily EDC needs. Interestingly, however, there used to be only the choice between a large rear pannier and a small front pannier. There is this emerging niche, especially coming out of the bike packing community, of micro panniers or nano panniers. I've reviewed a few of those, so I'll put links somewhere over here or here. Basically, they're panniers that are meant to augment a bike packing system. They tend to be smaller than your traditional front pannier. Bags in this line would be the Revlate Nano Panniers, the really small panniers from Outer Shell Adventure, and this pannier by Bedrock Bags. As you can see, lots of choice depending on what you plan to carry and for how long. I will say that the general rule of thumb in terms of pannier volume is that you will fill all the available room. So if you're trying to stay relatively light and minimal, start off with a smaller pannier. Because if you have a bigger pannier, nature abhors a vacuum, and you'll find ways to fill it up. So another point to consider is the pannier hardware itself. And this is where things get really interesting and you actually see a lot of functional difference. So we'll take a look at the Ortley hardware first. This is a hard plastic, but highly adjustable. There are all sorts of movable clips that you can move forward and aft, and hooks on the bottom so you get a super secure fit on your rack. And the main advantage of something like this is the adjustability. You can always adjust this so you're not getting a heel strike, or to lock it down on the dog leg of your rack so it doesn't bounce around when you're traveling. So highly adjustable, but a hard plastic. For some, this freaks people out. In our practical experience, I've yet to break a pannier hook. It may have happened to some people, but for us, in over a decade of touring and commuting, haven't had a problem with the Ortley Hardware personally. So another really popular style of hardware, in particular for smaller handcrafted bags in the US, is just a really simple hook and bungee system. So these tend not to be as adjustable. As you can see, you can't just open up a switch here and move it back and forth. It's kind of pretty much locked into place. Where there is adjustability, however, is in these bungee cords. You can lengthen and shorten it to adjust for different racks, for different types of tightness. I will say that even though this looks like super old school, it's also really functional and works surprisingly well. Once you get the bungee system dialed in, it's not gonna pop off. One really nice advantage of having a bungee hook on the bottom is that it keeps the bag under constant tension. So if you're going on a gravel road, since the bag is under tension, it's not gonna flop around as much. So for really rough off-road touring, we actually really highly recommend this system, even though in some ways it looks less sophisticated than the plastic hardware on the Ortley bag. Another really popular hardware style, which I'm not going to go into because I don't have one of their bags at the moment, is Arkell. Similar to the Ortley insofar as you can adjust it, but a little bit more complicated because it is metal hardware and there are cam buckles and everything. I've used those on bags in the past and have had no problems. Probably the only disadvantage is they are a little bit heavier than all these other options. And lastly, in terms of attachment hardware, this applies specifically to bike packing style bags. So these, like these bags from Revlate, which don't rely on any hardware at all, but rather straps and Velcro. So this one in particular goes transverse over your rack. Again, you can see there's no hooks or bungees or clips or anything. It's all a strap-based system. And on the bottom here, you have cam straps that you tighten around the bottom leg of your rack. Advantage of a system like this is that it's highly adjustable and there's no hardware to break. You know, theoretically, you could just sew on more webbing that you can find readily available or that you carry with you. And this works pretty well. You know, it's definitely, when you get bags that are this style, they're a lot harder to take on and off. So they're more of a kind of pannier that you would leave on your bike overnight. Right, so that's a lot to consider. One final and probably the most important thing to consider is what is your intended use? Are you going on a long multi-year expedition out in the middle of nowhere? Or are you gonna just do short tours when the weather is nice? So thinking realistically about how you plan to use the panniers is really gonna dictate which one is right for you. Theoretically, you may want a bomb-proof, waterproof Ortley, but if your actual use is just around town and you don't think you're gonna go touring when the weather is too crappy, then you could probably get away with a non-waterproof pannier. So lots of things to consider. We've reviewed a ton of bags on the YouTube channel. I'm gonna link to our ginormous bicycle bag playlist. And if you like content like this, consider supporting the channel. This is how it keeps going, through your direct support. We're not getting sponsored by any brands, and it's my goal to just give you information in a pretty straightforward manner. So if you like these vids, consider supporting the channel, and as always, keep the supple side down.